Well, good morning. It's been a tough spring so far. Hopefully some changes are in our future. This is the major election year in Michigan, and the state legislature still has some significant issues on its agenda as it returned after its spring break. This morning we'll get a Lansing update, and it starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, Senator Tom Casperson is currently the senior member of the Upper Michigan Legislative Delegation, having served 3 terms in the State House and is now in the final year of his second 4-year term in the State Senate. His district includes all of Upper Michigan, with the exception of Luce, Chippewa, and Mackinac counties. Always a pleasure to welcome Senator Casperson back to the Ryan Report. Nice to have you with us again.
Thanks for having me, Don.
And you folks are back in session still. You know, as I look at the list, I came up with like 18 things we could talk about, but I'm not going to do that because
Okay.
I'd like to go a little more deeply into some issues. I know, you know, have you reached that point in your term, and I know you can't totally set the agenda, where you want to focus on some things that are important to you while you're still there?
Yeah, I think people probably are seeing it through the legislation that we're trying to drive through right now, and clearly the regulatory part of it, because of my background, has been part of who I am. And so that's been part of what's going on. And the driving force for me really, though, Don, is our economy in the Upper Peninsula, and what is that going to look like, and what are our chances. And I've been finding over and over through all the years I've done this now that in too many cases it's been the regulatory side of the equation that has hurt the opportunity for some development for jobs. And so I'm going to remain focused and going to try and leave on hopefully a good note that shifts the power back to the citizen a little bit and away from, I'll say, the governing bodies.
And you've been clearly identified as someone in the lead trying to make some major changes. I think there's a 3-bill package, one of which would really make some changes in the DEQ as far as their authority in issuing permits. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, the permit process is something that people think that I'm trying to do it for the major companies, that we got to do that so that we can have these companies, much like what I talked about, hopefully we have jobs. There's part of that, but for me the bigger concern has been the one that's really stung when I found out what they have done, is when it hurts the little guy, the person just trying to get a permit to put a garage in their backyard, or trying to put a driveway in, or build that little retirement home that they've dreamed about, running into nothing but roadblocks from the department. Now again, if the rule and the law requires that they give them the roadblocks, I'll defend them all the way. But when it's real vague, and when they can use some kind of their own discretion, and it seems like it always goes against, that gets very frustrating. And I say that because we're the ones that get the call, Don. Our office gets the calls. They don't call the department, and they don't call the director of the department and say, this is wrong with the way you've treated me. They call us, and then we have to engage and get involved. So that's been the driving force behind it. The citizens, in my opinion, in many cases have been left behind. It's almost like their property rights, those type of things, aren't as important anymore. We're going to save the wetlands at all costs, and all wetlands, not pristine wetlands that I think you and I would agree need to be protected and saved.
This bill, as I understand it, would set up a separate panel that would look at these issues?
Yeah, and it's designed from an Indiana model. We had testimony from Indiana, people from Indiana. There was a legislator that came and testified. There was a person that actually serves on the panel, came and testified and described how it works, but also gave us insight as to why they did it. And it was amazing to listen to that testimony, because what they were describing was kind of the issues that we have here in Michigan. It's very similar, where the department, through their discretion, decided on governing a certain way with the rules and the law, and the legislature, there was a huge disagreement between the two, and that disagreement was because the citizens were the ones that were being held back, if you will, and the legislature would get the calls, act and get involved, and ultimately what came out of that is this model that we're hoping Michigan comes up with. And they claim that it has been very successful. And in fact, even the department, who reluctantly came to the table now in Indiana, likes it because it's very clear. There is no discretion in the sense that not quite sure what we should do here. The department knows exactly what they should be doing, and so does the citizen. The citizen knows exactly what the rules and the laws are.
You know, as we look at these issues, and I've been around long enough to see a major swing from when we didn't seem to care at all about the environment caring, and obviously we should care.
Absolutely.
And I think you would agree with that. But obviously many environmental groups are opposed to this legislation.
Well, they are, but I would argue that in my experience watching what's happened down in Lansing is the environmental community has had a good amount of access, I'll say, to the departments. So they can work through the departments more so than they've been able to work through the legislature. And the way that works is through the rules process. And if you have influence on the department itself, and you have influence during the time of rulemaking, you can start shaping the law to head in a direction you want it to go in. And that's why I think you see the departments and also a lot of the environmental groups that are opposing is they don't want to lose kind of that access that they've had. And I think through this open panel, this open public panel, so people can watch what's going on, they're going to lose some of that access. Doesn't mean they won't have access. They'll be able to testify. They'll be able to air their opinions like anybody else. They just won't have as much influence behind the scenes potentially as they might have now.
What's the potential of this legislation passing and the governor signing it?
I think it's very good. I actually, Don, so you know what started this really was the Republic issue that happened last summer when the DEQ was prolonging the opening or the allowing of a permit so they could use the dam for the fishing tournament. That started this because watching how they did that, there was no urgency to help this little community. It was, we're going to do it our way, and if it doesn't fit in with your fishing tournament, you know, so be it. It's not going to happen. And then we saw the direction of the director, the administration, everybody jumped on board to help us try to get the tournament going, but they had done some damage because of the time frame. That was kind of over the top, got this started. And so we started talking to the administration. I didn't do this without going to the governor's office and have this talk, but I started getting some support, and they certainly want to see what we've got, and they're going to weigh in on it. It's in the House now. But I've been working with them through this entire process, explaining in detail of some of the cases. It's hard because we're limited on time, but we could sit here and talk all day, and I could show you case after case. And that's the part that doesn't get out a lot of times to the public, of how many cases there has been. So we're hoping we do that.
Well, we do have to move along. And we have some other questions for you. We'll get to those in just a couple of minutes after we take this break. Our guest this morning is Senator Tom Casperson. We were talking during the break, and another issue kind of related in a way. It has to do with land management. And what are you trying to accomplish there?
Land management is designed around the fact that the state owns currently 4.6 million acres. The lion's share of all that land is in the Upper Peninsula in northern Lower Michigan. And as much as we all enjoy the great outdoors and using that land for our enjoyment, there's a cost to it. And in some cases, there's a cost to our local units of government. And so the land management plan was designed to give local units of government more say in the affected areas where there is heavily owned government land, whether you have federal land, state land, the conservancies, CFA land. All of that stuff combined in there makes up for a lot of land. So this will let the locals have some say. If you're 40% owned by government land in your local county, you will have say. If the state wants to buy more land in that county, you're going to be able to say no or yes to that purchase. The PILT payments have to be paid and paid in full.
Or payment in lieu of taxes.
Payment in lieu of taxes, and that's something that's really hurt our local units of government because the tax on the state land has been something that we've prorated the tax rate. If we don't have enough money to pay the taxes, we just change the rate. So we have enough money and we pay it that way, where a citizen would never be able to do that. They'd have to sell off some land. And so we've made it very clear that that must happen. The consequences right now are that if they don't, the land cap goes on and they can't buy another inch of land until the cap or until the PILT payment is paid. So that's in there, and we have agreements on just about everything in there right now. I think everybody's agreeing on, and I suspect that once it leaves the House, the governor will sign it.
Okay. We were all kind of surprised earlier this year when the Cleveland Cliffs chairman announced that there was a possibility of reopening the Empire Mine, and he's kind of basing what the future holds on kind of the relationship with the local community and local government and state government, and obviously there are some issues with the state of Minnesota. You've had some involvement here. Any insights you can provide at this point?
Yeah, I think they've been very straight with us. We've had multiple meetings with them. I look at it, Don, if it's a competitive thing between us and Minnesota, and there's a resurgence in the need for steel in this country, and we can help provide that, then we don't hurt ourselves by putting our best foot forward. And I think that's how we should look at this. I believe that because of our history here, our work ethic, everything that we've got going in Michigan right now, the mining legislation that was put forth before doesn't technically touch the iron mines in the sense it's more of the underground nickel mine, but we have become more of a pro-mining environment in the sense of high standards. We expect very high standards, but at the same time, we're not going to say no. So I think we have put a good culture forward, and hopefully at the end of the day, that plays well with Cliffs, and Cliffs sees that and sees that we're serious. We want them to come back, and we want them to make sure if they're looking for a place, this is where they make their home with the Empire.
Well, they have indicated that this would cost them $500 million. Much of that is dedicated to getting access to the ore body. Are there things the state could do to help them, or is that being considered?
It hasn't, because they haven't made that ask of us yet. Certainly we should look at it and consider it. But you're right, the Empire, the reason they closed it was because of the depth and the cost of getting the ore out. They had shared with us back then that there's ore there, it's just the cost of getting it out wasn't competitive anymore, and they were struggling with where the prices were at. So if that's something that can help them, they need to put a proposal forward, and we certainly should be, I think, open to considering it because of the impact it would have on our economy. And when you talk about the Empire, people a lot of times will talk about the UP economy. The Empire and the Tilden mines have had an impact on the state's economy. So this isn't just about the Upper Peninsula, this is about the whole state.
I hate to ask this question because I've asked you and every legislator, the big box store property tax issue, is anything going to happen?
Yeah, I don't know if anything legislative at this point. Escanaba had gone all the way to the Supreme Court over the Menards store, and they won. They got a favorable ruling in the fact that the Supreme Court upheld what the appellate court had said, and it really was in favor of where we stand on it, or where I stand on it, and that is that they should be paying their fair share, and that this loophole that they were using, this dark store loophole they were using, was inappropriate. So the courts have upheld it. It's a matter of now, will the Court of Appeals uphold it? We would be stronger, in my opinion, if we pass legislation and put it in statute. That's been very difficult, and as I've seen with the chairman in my committee, he's been holding pretty fast on that he thinks lower taxes are better, and I don't disagree with him, except they need to be fair taxes.
Kind of strong opposition from the State Chamber of Commerce, I think, is one of the issues.
The Michigan Chamber of Commerce has been very opposed to it, but again, those are their members, so they're going to come out hard and fast.
Okay, got some more questions for you. We'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. Back with the Ryan Report in just 2 minutes from now. Again, we're talking with Senator Tom Casperson. One of the things we've talked about in the past with you and others is what's been called the Northern Michigan Sports Commission, which would take some revenue kind of away from Cobo Hall, and among other things, it was somewhat dedicated initially to Copper Peak. Yeah. Is that legislation still have legs, or?
It does. We've had some trouble when we put it up for a vote in the Senate. One of my colleagues from down by Southeast Michigan, who opposes what we're trying to do, came up with some clever amendments that would have made it very difficult for my colleagues to vote against the amendments, but then it would have wiped out what we were trying to do. And he did it on purpose. He was trying to block us and stop us. He knew I had the votes, and I can't stop that. That's part of the process. So I decided not to put it up for a vote. I didn't want to put other colleagues in harm's way. I felt bad enough as it was, because there were people that were really going to step up and help us that wouldn't have helped them back in their district at all. So we're going to try a different approach at this point. The bill's still there. We keep talking to leadership to try and come up with a clever way to figure out a way to put something together that we can find a funding source to get us started. That's what's needed here. We just need to get started. We put this in place, and the International Olympic team comes to the Upper Peninsula, then all bets are off. I think this thing takes off, and it is a big deal all the way around for the west end of the UP and for all of Michigan.
Okay. A couple other issues. Obviously, the issue of violence in schools has captured the attention of many people after the tragedies we've witnessed. Do you have any thoughts on this issue as far as what Michigan should or could be doing?
Yeah, we've kind of stayed silent a little bit, just trying to work through this thing and let the emotions settle a little bit. So we do come up with some ways of handling this. The sad part, Don, is I think one of the major first steps needs to be to secure our schools. And it's just sad to even have to say that we have to secure our schools. But that's where I think it's going to start. We've got to do something about the school systems themselves, help them get in a position that they can get in a secured situation where anybody thinking of coming in with something is going to be stopped before they ever get into the schools. And then the bigger discussion, I think, needs to be around what's going on socially, what's going on in our country, what's going on with our students, that kids are getting into being so twisted and demented that they're willing to go do this kind of stuff. I don't hear that conversation. I think the reason we don't is because the gun issue is so politically charged that it's almost, let's talk about that period and where do you stand, and then the battle begins. And I think there's some big questions that need to be asked, Don, of what's going on in our society, because it's too widespread. There's too many cases of these kind of things happening, and it doesn't matter. In my opinion, it doesn't matter what the weapon is. The fact that somebody's willing to take a weapon and do that is the problem. We've got to figure out why that's happening to our kids.
Okay. Let's talk about, this is a huge election year in Michigan, and actually your seat is probably one of the big prizes in the Upper Peninsula. So we can probably see a spirited race there as you'll be leaving that seat.
Yeah, we should. You know, the unique thing for us in the Upper Peninsula, when I first ran in 2003, the UP was pretty heavy, leaned pretty heavy to the Democratic side of the equation. Pretty tough for a Republican to take a run and make it up here on the state level. It seemed different on the federal level. When you look at statewide races, presidents, those type of things, UP would vote Republican, but when it came to my level and down, we were pretty much Democratic. But there's been a pretty nice change, in my opinion, in that there's primaries now, and people actually on both sides have people jumping in and trying to run for these seats. And in my case, in my Senate seat, we actually have a primary going on the Republican side right now in that for that seat. Anytime those things happen, I think that's good for the citizen. They get to get some choices and get some debate going out there. So, as I leave the legislature, I look back now and I look at where we're at for the Upper Peninsula. I think that's good, and I think the citizens, the more the citizens make us compete for these positions, the better representatives we're going to get.
We have an open House seat in the 110th district, and of course the whole House is up for re-election. Have you picked a favorite in the governor's race?
I have. I'm supporting Bill Schuette. Out of the three that I have to pick with, I serve with Patrick in the Senate. I actually served with Brian Calley in the House for his first term, my last term, and now as our lieutenant governor, we've served together. But I think Bill is in the best position to take it. It's going to be a tough race from what we can see, and it could go either way. And if Gretchen is the Democratic nominee for the Democrats, I just believe Bill's in a good position to be able to beat Gretchen for that seat. And all three of the people I mentioned that I serve with are all good people, but I just think Bill's in a better position to win it.
Thanks for coming in this morning. We have to have you back again at least once as your career in the state legislature comes to a close.
Thanks, Don.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
I'll be back with some other thoughts for you after we take this break. On a recent show, I mentioned I purchased my first car as a teenager when I was working at WJPD Radio for the minimum wage of 75 cents an hour. Today, let me tell you the rest of that story. A couple of key points to set it up. First, when I was in high school, they didn't offer or require driver training. It was up to you and your family to teach you how to drive. Which brings us to point number two. My family didn't have a car. We pretty much got where we had to go by walking. But after I got a job working at the radio station, I was pretty flush with cash for a 17-year-old, so I decided it would be great to have a car. I was earning enough that I could afford to buy a car, but there was one problem. Didn't know how to drive. And as I mentioned, I had no one at home to teach me. I looked around at some of the places that sold cars and finally settled on one I liked at Velmetti Chevrolet in Ishpeming. The car was a 1954 Plymouth. The salesman I was working with was named Jerry, friendly guy who was good to deal with. One day I went to Jerry and told him I would make him a deal. I explained I didn't know how to drive and had no one to teach me, So the proposition I was offering him was this: I would buy the car if he would teach me how to drive. I had to learn enough about driving to be able to get a driver's license. I think Jerry was a little taken back by the offer, but after a little thought, he agreed to do it. It was summer, didn't have school, had a lot of time available, so for the next week, he took me out for an hour or two every morning. The lessons were complicated because, of course, the car had a stick shift like most did back in those days. But Jerry did his best to teach me, did a good job, because by the end of the week, I went in and got my driver's license and bought the car. I now had my own transportation. It just so happens that on that Friday night, I had a date with an attractive girl from Negaunee. You know, back in those days, high school kids in Ishpeming would buzz the gut every Friday and Saturday night. Translated, that basically meant aimlessly driving up and down Main Street in your car. So there I was with my new car and a pretty girl doing something I'd never been able to do before. Unfortunately, the story did not have a happy ending. You see, back then, cars' bumpers were actually separate parts that actually stuck out on the front and rear of the car. And with that arrangement, it was possible to lock bumpers without doing any real damage if one car ran into another. And that's just what happened to me on that Friday night in Ishpeming. And as I sat there, hopelessly entangled with the car in front of me, who should come walking down the street but Jerry, my car salesman. I know he saw me, but he didn't miss a step as he continued down the street. Guess his driving lessons didn't come with a guarantee. It worked out okay in the end. That was just the beginning of my driving experience. It did get better from there. I'll be back in a minute. Need to wrap it up for another week. One final reminder that if you missed this show, it is available on our website at uppermichigansource.com. Today's edition will be available starting on Monday afternoon. Thanks to Senator Tom Casperson for joining us this morning to provide a legislative update. And thank you for being here. Let's make a date to get together again next Sunday morning.